company starts indigo plantations in India. This video is brought to you by Unacademy in association with GyanCentral.com. So we know that the British realized that it could not only use the countryside for earning land revenue but also could use to grow crops that the European market demanded. Now, in the European market, indigo was in popular demand. Why? Because this crop would produce a rich blue color dye, which would then be used to color cotton yarn. This dye came from a plant which was essentially found in the tropics. So, it was a tropical plant and it could not be grown in the temperate zone. As a result of which, India became the biggest supplier of indigo in those times. Indian indigo was being used by cloth manufacturers in Italy, France, and Britain to dye cloth, but the problem was that the Indian indigo's price was very high. So they used another replacement of indigo in the European market for a while, which was known as woad. But worried by the competition from indigo, the woad producers in the European market pressurized the governments to ban the import of indigo. Interesting fact is that the cloth dryers in the European markets actually preferred indigo instead of woad because indigo produced a very rich color, rich blue color, which the woad could not produce. The woad produced a very dull, pale color. So the cloth dryers helped lifting up the ban on the import of indigo. After this ban was lifted, a lot of the European giants like the French, the Britain, the Portuguese, the Spanish all started actually cultivating many indigo plantations. Plantations are nothing but a large farm which are opened by a planter. They employ a lot of forced labor. In fact, the late 18th century saw a huge rise in the European demand for indigo. But the problem was that there was a very low production of indigo in that year. So the big question now comes, from where could they procure the indigo to suffice this huge demand? Now, faced with the rising demand for indigo in the European market, the company in India sought to increase the area under indigo cultivations. Between 1788 to 1810, percentage of indigo imported to Britain from India rose from 30% to a whooping 95%. Now, as Indian trade grew, commercial agents and officials of the company began investing in the indigo production. And attracted by this prospect of high profits, many Scotsmen and Englishmen actually came to India and became planters. So, the big question now comes, how was indigo cultivated? Now, there were two main systems of the indigo cultivation. One was called the niche plantations, and the other was called as the roti. Now, in the niche cultivations, the planter produced indigo in those lands which he directly controlled. He either bought the land or rented it from other zamindars and produced this indigo by directly employing hired laborers. Now, there were many problems associated with this niche cultivations. First of all, this indigo plantation was difficult to expand because the indigo could be cultivated only in certain areas which were very fertile. So it was difficult to expand the area under the niche cultivation. Suppose we have a piece of land suitable for indigo cultivation. So the planter looks for large compact blocks within this land that he can acquire so that he could plant indigos here. But all he manages to get is small plots of land scattered all over the place. So it becomes a problem for the planter to expand the area to cultivate only indigos. So the indigo planters came up with this idea of attempting to lease the land around this indigo factory. But what happened was there was a lot of conflicts, obviously, because they tried to evict the peasants around the indigo factory. So this was not a good option. The second problem was that a large plantation required a vast number of hands to operate, but the labor was needed precisely at a time when the peasants were actually busy with rice cultivations. So, labor was also hard to find. Another major problem was that a niche cultivation always required a lot of plows and bullocks. One bigha, which is almost one third of an acre, required two plows. Investing on the purchase and maintenance of these plows was a big problem. And nor could supplies be easily got from the peasants since their plows and bullocks were busy on their rice fields, again exactly at the time that the indigo planters needed them. Only 25% of the entire indigo cultivation was under this niche system. The rest was under this roti system. So let us look at what this system was all about. So under this system, the planters forced the roads to sign a contract with them. Sometimes they pressurized the village headman to sign the contract on behalf of the roads. Those who signed the contract got cash advances for cultivating the crops. These cash advances were given at very low rates of interest, but once the Roth signed the contract, he had to commit to growing indigo on at least 25% of the land he held. The planter only provided with the seed and the drill, while the cultivators prepared the soil, sowed the seed, and looked after the crop. So, when the crop was ready and was delivered to the planter, a new loan was lent out to the Roth. So, the cycle started all over again. Now, there were certain problems associated with this system as well. Starting with the first, the peasants that initially got tempted by the loan realized that how harsh the system was for them. The price that they got for the indigo was pretty low, so they were never able to come out of the cycle of loans. Secondly, the planters usually insisted that the indigo should be cultivated on the best soils, in which the peasants prefer to cultivate rice. And thirdly, indigo had deep roots that eroded the soil or exhausted the soil rapidly. And after an indigo harvest, the land could not sow rice. On an average, both niche and the roti system faced many problems during their indigo cultivation. In our next video, we'll be talking about how these problems led to something known as the Blue Rebellion or the Indigo Rebellion.